You're watching Inside Utah Politics.
Time now to break down some of the big stories of the week with the Inside Utah Politics panel. This week we have Chris Kimball and Derek Kitchen. Great to have both of you with us. Thanks so much for being here.
Thanks for having us.
It's my pleasure.
Okay, so some big stories throughout the week. The governor called a special session on Wednesday where the inland port bill was passed. Let's go ahead and start with that one. Derek, glad to have you on this week for the perspective that you provide here, and we'll go ahead and start with you. Jackie Biskupski, Mayor Biskupski, went to the session, the committee hearing, and said there was no point in coming to the table because it was made clear to her that she wouldn't have her authority. You guys obviously saw it different on the council because you continued negotiations with the state. Why?
So when negotiations broke down between Mayor Biskupski and Governor Herbert, it was tossed out into the universe that they were open to a dialogue with the city council. And so the city council, all 7 members of us, we sent a letter to the governor and the speaker and Senator Jim DeBacchus, and we expressed our interest in supporting them and you know, coming to the table, the dialogue, because this is an incredibly important issue in Salt Lake City. The inland port affects, you know, an enormous swath of land in the western part of our city, and we want to get it right. And so all 7 members came to the table, and this last Wednesday we showed up for the special session, and it was kind of like, you know, it was all kumbaya. We were all happy. We came to the table. We all got something good out of it. We didn't get everything, but at the end of the day, the residents and taxpayers of Salt Lake City are getting a much better shake out of a bad deal.
Okay, let's bring you in, Chris. A lot of people are complaining about the transparency behind the deal and how it came together. You can see their point there.
I can, and when he mentioned about everybody coming together, it would have been great if they would have all come together before they even thought to pass the bill, because special sessions do cost money. They cost the taxpayer dollars when you call and reconvene during the summer. And this particular bill that is so huge, and there's a lot of unanswered questions, there's a lot of unintended consequences that may crop up because of this bill, that they really should have put it into the interim session and invited Mayor Biskupski to be part of the negotiations on the front end, instead of passing the bill and waiting to see what it would look like when the bill got passed, and then looking to see, oh, what do you feel about this, Salt Lake City? I mean, we just took 22,000 acres of your land. So I just think that if they were really sincere in wanting to have Jackie Biskupski's input, they would have talked to her on the front end before the bill was ever passed.
For what it's worth, Jackie had been invited more than half a dozen times formally, and we have all that correspondence documented. And it's unfortunate that she wasn't there because we are missing the voice of the mayor from Salt Lake City.
But was she invited prior to the bill being passed?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Let's talk about the mayor's approach. Did she miss an opportunity to stand up and lead in that situation as opposed to remaining silent throughout the process once negotiations broke down?
You know, for me, we saw Erin Mendenhall, the chair of the city council, really shine in the last couple of weeks because she has cultivated input from the community, and we had 4 of our major areas of concern almost completely addressed in this this special session. And so, you know, not to speak about Mayor Biskupski, but I will say that we do have leadership in the city, and it's with Erin Mendenhall and some of our city council members. So, you know, there's great leadership there. It's unfortunate that the mayor wasn't involved because her voice is missing, and she was elected to represent Salt Lake City, and sitting from the sidelines doesn't help anybody.
Any thoughts on that approach?
Well, it's an interesting approach, and I certainly can't speak for her. I don't know. We're kind of in a new culture where there's a lot of protesting done, and it's done in different ways. And it could be that she just felt like Salt Lake City really wasn't being watched over, and maybe she just doesn't want her fingerprints on what could happen in the future. You know, like I say, this is the unseen. We don't know what's going to happen with this inland port. And it went through a session where you're trying to pass 1,200 bills, and it doesn't really get the scrutiny it needs. And like I say, I think it would have been, there would have been less ruffled feathers if things would have just taken time and gone through the interim session and then brought it forward next session.
You and your colleagues, though, are pretty clear that you believe this is a good step for the city moving forward.
I mean, in addition to getting, representation, accountability, the tax increment addressed, and a few others, we also got 10% set aside for affordable housing. That's going to be hundreds of millions of dollars for affordable housing over the next 25 years. This is unprecedented. This is a good thing for Salt Lake City.
Okay, let's move forward. Online tax bill also addressed during the special session. Utah expecting somewhere around $60 million as a result of the Supreme Court ruling on online sales tax. That will go into the general fund and can be dispersed accordingly. Where would be the smart place to put this windfall of cash coming in from the state? Chris, let's start with you.
Well, a couple of weeks ago, Governor Herbert even suggested that perhaps the gas tax might need to be, we might not need it, re-examined because of this new windfall. But then once he got straightened out with his budget staff, they realized that this money was already allocated into the general fund. But if I had my wish list, $60 million sounds like a lot of money, but when you compare it to a billions and billion-dollar budget, it is really a small amount. But I'd love to see more happen in education, but unfortunately it seems like the more money we put in education, it goes into the wrong hands and it never gets to where it really should be. And so right now it's an allocation that will just go into the general fund, and I'm sure that the legislators will be deciding in next January what they want to do with it.
You may be one of those legislators, possibly. You have the general election coming up in November. What would your take be on that extra money?
Well, you're right. It's going to go into the general fund, and $60 million sounds like a lot to the average Joe, myself included. But in such a large budget, I mean, it's easy to get lost. I would love to see us invest in education. I think not only do we need to see our, per pupil spending go up and, invest in our teachers, but we really need to start looking at an early childhood education program. Utah has the youngest population in the country, and we don't make some of these critical investments. And education is really where we need to be putting our money right now.
Let's move on to the 4th Congressional District. Representative Mia Love facing a pretty tight race against Salt Lake County Mayor Ben McAdams. Real Clear Politics during the week ranked this as a toss-up. Why is this such a close race with Mia Love being an incumbent there?
Well, that's been an interesting district because she lost the first time with the redistricting against Matheson. And so and this is such an interesting climate because we're seeing Mia kind of shift a little bit more towards the center and left in a way, with some of her talk about with immigration and kind of shifting away from where the Republican base is, and I don't know how that's going to play out with the voters. I really don't. But then on the other hand, with Ben McAdams, whether that information about him wanting to hide, or not hide, but not disclose the public meetings that they were holding with Mountain Accord, and it wasn't until our auditor, came forward and said, no, that is public funding going into Mountain Accord, and so those have to be open air meetings, so to speak. And so it's going to be, they both got their strengths and weaknesses. I personally, as a Republican, I'm totally hoping that Mia pulls through. I support most everything that she, she's a Republican Party platform, which is where I am, so that's what I'm hoping happens.
Okay, Derek, let's bring you in. How do you see that race playing out?
It's a toss-up, as you mentioned, and part of the reason for that, in my view, is because you're just seeing our community grow so fast. We're going to double in population in the next 25 years, so you see demographics shifting, you see people moving in from out of state, and so their political persuasion is a little bit different, and I think it's an exciting time to be a member of, the Democratic Party in the state of Utah, because we've historically been the super minority, and we see light at the end of the tunnel. And so I think it's great for policy when you have a competitive race. And so, whether Mia Love wins or Ben McAdam wins, I think we're going to see a district that is represented by a moderate, and I think that that's good for the state of Utah.
All right, and it's a race that the entire country will be watching. Appreciate having both of you here. Thanks for your input.
Thanks, Ben.
Stay with us. We'll be right back with more Inside Utah Politics right after the break.